Namo Bhaktivinodaya Satchidananda Namine Gaura Shakti Swarupaya Rupanuga Varayate.
When religion was placed at the service of the body, and the ignorant were considered saints, when yoga was addressed for the pleasure of the senses, and emptiness became the goal of philosophical searches, when japa served as a means to become famous, and austerity as an instrument of revenge, when alms were given out of pride and shameful, sinful deeds began to be covered up in the name of unconstrained and free devotion, and even cultured and educated people often quarreled among themselves. At that time, the Almighty Creator sent you to earth. Prayer in separation with Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Excerpt from a book, Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj Sri Prapana Jivanamritam. Sri Sachidananda Bhaktivinoda Thakur was born into a wealthy family on the 13th day of Badr, the day after the appearance of Vamanadeva on September 2nd, 1838, at Biranagar, Ulagrama, in the Bengal district of Nadia. He was the seventh son of Raja Krishnananda Datta, a great devotee of Lord Nityananda. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was also known as the great-grandson of Madana Mohana and the third son of his godfather Ananda Chandra. He will be known as Daitya Kulera Prahlada of the family of demons. This happened because Vaishnavism was not respected in the family. The godfather gave him the name Kedaranatha Datta. Little Kedarnath Datta spent his childhood in the mansion of his maternal grandfather Musta Upi Mahasaya in Biranagar. At that time, his entourage was very rich. He received his primary education at an elementary school run by his grandmother. Later, Kedaranatha Datta attended an English school at Krishnanagar founded by the king of Nadia. He dropped out of that school when his older brother died unexpectedly of cholera. When he was 11 years old, his father died, and subsequently the land allotment, which was given to his grandmother, changed hands. At this time, the family was in poverty, and their great wealth turned out to be illusory. However, Kedaranatha Datta overcame these difficulties with great endurance. His mother arranged his marriage when he was 12 years old, in 1850, with the 5-year-old daughter of Madhusudana Mitra Mahasaya, a resident of Ranagata. Around this time, the uncle of Kedar Nathakasi Prasada Ghosh Mahasaya Thakur, who was educated in Britain, came to Ulagrama after the death of his maternal grandfather. He taught the young Kedar Nath at his home in Calcutta. At first, the boy's mother resisted this, but by the time he was 13, he was allowed to go to the big city. His uncle's house was in the Heduya area of central Calcutta. Kasi Prasada was the central figure of the literary circle of his time. Being the editor of the Hindu Intelligencer newspaper, many writers came to him to learn the art of writing in correct English. Kedaranatha assisted Kasi Prasada in evaluating manuscripts submitted to the newspaper. Kedaranatha studied Kasi Prasada books and also frequented the public library. He attended the Hindu Charitable Institute High School in Calcutta and became an expert in reading, speaking, and writing English. Kedaranatha fell ill from the salt water of Calcutta. He returned to Ulagrama and was treated by a Muslim soothsayer who foretold that the village of Biranagara would soon become plagued and deserted. The Muslim also prophesied that Kedaranatha would become a recognized great devotee of Lord Krishna. In 1856, when Kedaranatha was 18 years old, he entered college in Calcutta. He began to write extensively in both English and Bengali. All of his essays have been published in local journals. He also lectured in both languages. At that time, he studied English literature intensively and taught oratory to a man who would later become a well-known orator in the British Parliament. Between 1857 to 1858, he composed an English epic in 2 parts called Poriad, which he planned to complete in 12 books. These 2 books describe the life of Porus, who met with Alexander the Great. Dwijendranatha Thakur, the eldest son of Maharshi Devendranatha Tagore, and brother of the Nobel Prize-winning poet Rabindranath Tagore, was Kedarnathi's best friend during these years. He assisted Kedaranatha in his study of Western religious literature. Kedaranatha used to call Dwijendranath Barodada, or elder brother. He was very passionate about Christian theology and found it more interesting than Hindu monism. He spent many hours comparing the writings of Channing, Theodore Parker, Emerson, and Newman. At the British Indian Society, he gave a lecture on the evolution of matter under the influence of the material mode of goodness. At the end of 1858, Kedaranatha returned to Biranagara and found that the prediction of a Muslim soothsayer about this place had come true. It was destroyed and abandoned. Kedaranatha brought his mother and paternal grandmother from there to Calcutta. Shortly thereafter, he went to Orissa to visit his paternal grandfather, Raja Vallabh Datta, a former important gentleman from Calcutta who now lived as an ascetic in rural Orissa. His days were coming to an end, and he wanted Kedaranatha to be with him when he left this world. After receiving the last instructions of his grandfather, he visited all the monasteries and temples of the state of Orissa. Kedaranatha began to ponder the question of livelihood. At that time, he was not interested in business because he saw how the dishonesty of the trading world morally weakened the merchant class. He decided to become a school teacher, founding an English language school in the village of Kendrapara in Orissa, thus becoming a pioneer in teaching English in that state. After some time, he went to Puri and passed the teacher's examination. He got a position as a teacher in a private school and later became headmaster in Bhadrak and then in Medinipur. His first son, Anada Prasad Achyutananda, was born in Bhadraka in 1860. That year, he published a book in English in which he described all the ashrams and temples in the state. This book received favorable mention in a work called Orissa by the British historian Sir William Hunter. Hunter praised the moral and religious character of Kedaranatha. As headmaster of the Medinipur High School, Kedaranatha studied many of the popular Bengali religious sects, especially their philosophy and practice. He came to the conclusion that they are all very weak, and the only real religion ever established in Bengal was that of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Kedaranatha could not even get hold of a 16th century Bengali biography of Lord Chaitanya's activities on earth called Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, despite searching in bookstores, libraries, and monasteries throughout Bengal. Kedaranathi's first wife died, and in the city of Jakapur he married Bhagyavati De. In 1861, Kedaranatha took over as deputy magistrate in the government of Bengal. He then became an employee of the fundraising department after he saw the corruption of government officials. He founded an organization called Bratra Samaja. In 1863, he wrote a book in English called Our Desires. At the same time, he built a house in Ranagat. Later, in 1863, in Burdwan, he wrote 2 new poems in Bengali, Vijayanagrama, Abandoned Village, and Sannyasi. In the 39th volume of the Calcutta Journal of 1863, these verses were praised. We hope that the author will continue to give his countrymen the benefit of his elegant and unpretentious pen, which is completely free from those unwanted liberties in thought and expression with which many dramas abound, recently published. The task of the day is to create a literature for Hindu women, and we hope that many of the more educated locals will have the good sense to devote their time and ability to this most desired end. The rhyme and style of these 2 poems were original. They gave rise to a new way of writing poetry in Bengali. In 1866, Kedaranatha assumed the position of deputy registrar with the powers of deputy tax collector and deputy magistrate in Chapara district. He also spoke Persian and Urdu quite fluently. At a place called Saran in Chapar, a group of tea planters made unfair demands on him. He successfully resisted them, and while staying in Saran, he visited the ashram of Gautama in Godan. Wishing to establish a school for the teaching of Nyaya Shastra, he gave a speech there in 1866, which was well received. The school was successfully founded. The foundation stone was laid in 1883 by Sir Rivers Thompson, after whom the school was named. Although Kedaranatha was no longer involved in the project after his performance, His performance was instrumental in engaging the public and helping the school. Also, in 1866, he translated into Urdu the Balid Registration Manual, which was distributed by the government throughout the United Provinces of Agra and Oud. This manual has been used by the registration departments of these areas. Kedaranatha was transferred to Purnia from Chapara, where he took charge of the government and judicial departments. He was then transferred to Dina Japur, West Bengal, in 1868, becoming a deputy magistrate. During this time, he received copies of Srimad Bhagavatam and Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita from Calcutta. He continued to read the Chaitanya Charitamrita deeply, and his faith in Krishna continued to grow until he was completely absorbed in Krishna consciousness day and night. His prayers for the mercy of the Lord were sincere and constant. He succeeded in understanding the supreme magnitude and power of the one and undivided absolute personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. He published a song about Lord Chaitanya called Satchidananda Premalankara. He wrote this song in Bengali in poetic form to express his love and devotion to Lord Chaitanya. In 1869, while serving as deputy magistrate of the government of Bengal at Dina Japur, he delivered a discourse in the form of a treatise he had written on the Srimad Bhagavatam, called the Bhagavat Prasanna, in the presence of many literati and spiritual leaders from various parts of India and England, and it has attracted the attention of both Eastern and Western scientists and thinkers. This treatise is a profound analysis and commentary on Srimad Bhagavatam. He was transferred to Kamparana, during which his second son, Radhika Prasad, was born. In Kamparan, the people worshipped a ghost in a banyan tree, which they believed had the power to influence the opinion of the local judge and force him to rule in their favor. One day, Kedaranatha invited the father of Pandita Ramabai, a famous female scholar, to read Srimad Bhagavatam under this tree. A month later, the tree fell to the ground and many people saw it and gained faith in Srimad Bhagavatam. From Kamparana, he went to Puri, which filled his heart immensely, because in the holy city of Puri, on the site of the famous temple of Krishna Jagannatha, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu lived for 18 years as a sannyasi, hermit. Not far from Puri, in the city of Kamanala, there lived a yogi named Bisakishena, who, sitting next to him, leaned towards the fire and then returned to a straight sitting posture. In this way, he swayed back and forth over the flames and also called fire from his head. He had two companions whose names were Brahma and Shiva. Bisakishena himself claimed to be Mahavishnu. Some wealthy landowners of Orissa fell under his influence and allocated funds for the construction of the temple. They also sent him women with whom he indulged in the pleasures of Rasa Leela. Bisakishena declared that he would expel the British rulers from Orissa and proclaim himself king. Such inflammatory statements were spread throughout Orissa. The British considered him a revolutionary, so the district governor of the national government of Bengal issued an arrest warrant. But no one in Orissa dared to carry out this order, for they were all afraid of the yogi's power. Mr. Ravenshaw, district commissioner of Orissa, asked Kedaranatha to prosecute Bisakishena. To complete this task, Kedaranatha went personally to Bisakishena, who displayed some supernatural powers and stated that he knew his mission well and who he was. He warned Kedaranatha that as Lord, it was better for him not to interfere in his affairs. Kedaranatha acknowledged Bisakishena's achievements in yoga and invited him to come to Puri to see the Jagannath temple. However, Bisakishena arrogantly refused, declaring that Jagannath was just a piece of wood and he himself was the supreme. This infuriated Kedaranatha, and he arrested Bisakishena. He was taken to Puri and thrown into prison, where he was guarded by 36 Muslim constables and 72 police officers from Karagday and Naya. Brahma and Shiva escaped arrest by claiming that they did what Bisakishena forced them to do, but later Mr. Taylor, a unit officer in Kodar, sued them. Kedaranatha also tried to arrest Bisakishena in Puri. The trial lasted 18 days, during which thousands of people gathered outside the courtroom demanding his release. On the 6th day of the process, Kedaranatha's second daughter, 7-year-old Kadambini, became seriously ill and almost died, but due to the power of yoga, she recovered within a day. Kedaranatha knew that this was a miracle and declared, "Even if we all die, this scoundrel must be punished." The very next day in court, the yogi announced that he had shown his strength and would show much more. He He suggested to Kedarnatha to release him immediately or face worse suffering. On the last day of the ordeal, Kedarnatha himself fell ill with a high fever and suffered all day just like his daughter. But Kedarnatha found the man guilty and sentenced him to 18 months for political conspiracy. When Biskishenu was being prepared for imprisonment, a certain Dr. Walter, the district physician, cut off all of the yogi's long hair. The yogi kept his mystical power in his hair and did not eat or drink during the entire trial, so when his hair was cut, he fell to the floor as if dead and had to be carried on a stretcher to the prison. After 3 months, he was transferred to Midnapur Central Jail, where he took poison and died in 1873. In Puri Kedara, the Natha studied Srimad Bhagavatam with the commentary of Sridhara Swami, and transcribed by Satsandarbha Jiva Goswami, and specially studied Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrta Sindhu. Between 1874 and 1893, Kedaranatha spent much time in seclusion, chanting the holy name and continuing his mundane duties. He also wrote several books in Sanskrit, including the Tattva Sutra and the Tattva Viveka. In addition, he wrote many books in Bengali, including Kalyan Kalpatara, and in 1874 he created Data Kaustuba in Sanskrit. While in Puri, he founded a Vaishnava debating society known as the Bhagavat Samsad in the gardens of Jagannatha Vallabha, where the famous Saint Sri Ramananda Rai meditated hundreds of years ago. All the prominent Vaishnavas, except Raghunatha Das Babaji, joined the group of Kedarnatha. He did not wear a kantimala or tilaka, so Raghunatha Das Babaji considered him unauthorized and advised other Vaishnavas to avoid his company. But soon Raghunatha Das Babaji became mortally ill, and Lord Jagannath appeared to him in a dream, instructing him to pray for the mercy of Kedarnatha for a cure. Raghunatha Das Babaji accepted this advice and was cured by special medicines given to him by Kedaranatha. Thus, Raghunatha Das Babaji recognized the true spiritual position of Kedarnatha. Svarupa Dasa Babaji, a famous saint, performed his worship at Satasana by the ocean in Puri. Svarupa was deeply devoted to Kedaranatha and gave him many valuable instructions on chanting the holy name of Krishna. Another famous saint, Charan Dasa Babaji, printed books and preached a distorted style of kirtana, advising the use of the Hare Krishna mantra in japa and Nitai Gaura Radhe, Shyama Hare Krishna Hare Rama in kirtana. Kedaranatha preached to him diligently, and eventually Charan Das Babaji realized his mistake and asked Kedaranatha's forgiveness for spreading this nonsensical style of chanting throughout Bengal. 6 months later, Charan Das went mad and died in great grief. Kedaranatha became the manager of the Jagannath temple. He used his governmental powers to establish a strict regularity in deity worship. Kedaranatha installed the Bhakti Mandapa in the courtyard of the Jagannath temple, where the Srimad Bhagavatam was discussed daily. He spent many hours discussing Krishna and chanting the holy name, especially at the important places of Sri Chaitanya's pastimes, such as the temple of Tota Gopinath, the tomb of Haridasa Thakura, the Siddha Bakula tree, and the Gambhira room. He made notes on the Vedanta Sutra, which were used by Sri Syamalala Goswami in Baladeva Vidyabhushana's edition of Govinda Bhasya, which he published. In 1874, on the 5th day of the dark fortnight of Magha, in a large house near the gardens of Jagannatha Vallabha, adjacent to Narayana Chatha Math, the fourth son of Kedaranatha was born. He was named Bimala Prasad, and later became known as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, the spiritual master of Srila A.K. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and founder of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And Magha is one of the months in the Hindu calendar, which usually comes in February-March in the Gregorian calendar. Various religious ceremonies and festivals take place during this month, including the Shivaratri festival. The dark weeks, Krishna Paksha in Magha, are considered especially auspicious for spiritual practice and prayer. This period is also called Manamasa, month of silence, when people practice meditation in silence to focus their thoughts on God. The birth of Bimala Prasad at such an auspicious time was considered a special omen and foreshadowed his future spiritual significance. 2 years earlier, Kamala Prasad, his third son, was born. In 1874, Kedaranatha discovered that the Raja, king of Puri, had misappropriated 80,000 rupees intended for the temple in order to gratify his sense desires. Kedaranatha demanded that the Raja pay for food offerings to Lord Jagannath, which are made 52 times a day, using this money. This quickly reduced the amount of money, which caused the Raja's anger towards Kedarnathu. The king decided to organize a yagya, fire sacrifice, meant to kill Kedarnatha with the help of 50 Brahmin priests. The yagya lasted 30 days, but when the last victims were brought into the fire, the son of the Raja died, and not Kedarnath. Kedaranatha left Puri on special business, returning to Bengal where he visited the holy cities of Nabadwip, Shantipur, and Kalana. He was placed in charge of the Mahisareka division at Howrah. After that, he was transferred to Bhadraka. In August 1878, he was appointed head of the Naraila division in the Yashohan district. During his stay in Narail, he published 2 books about Krishna, which became famous throughout the world, Sri Krishna Samhita and Kalyan Kalpataru. In a letter dated April 16, 1880, Dr. Reinhold Rost wrote to Kedaranatha, "In presenting the character of Krishna and his worship in a more exalted and transcendent light than has hitherto been customary to treat him, you have done an essential service to your fellow believers, and no one would accept this in mind. Your work is more enjoyable than my late friend Goldstucker, the most sincere and zealous defender of Hinduism ever known in Europe." In 1877, Virata Prasad, his 5th son, was born. Viraja Prasad, the 6th son, was born in 1878. Both appeared at Rana Ghat. Kedaranatha received an official Vaishnava initiation from Bipin Bihari Goswami, who came from a Bhagnapara Janava family. At the same time, his 7th son, Lalita Prasad, appeared at Rana Ghat. A few years after his initiation, Kedaranatha was awarded the title Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur by the Vaishnavas in recognition of his tireless dissemination of the philosophy of devotion, bhakti, to Sri Krishna. Many of the inhabitants of the city of Narail officially converted to Vaishnavism, but due to their lack of education in spiritual philosophy, they became easy prey for upstarts who used their feelings of devotion for their own benefit. However, Bhaktivinoda Thakur gave these simple devotees shelter and instructed them in detail on the basic truths of Vaishnavism so that they could understand their faith and spiritual life more deeply. In 1881, Bhaktivinoda began publishing Sajanaroshani, his Vaishnava magazine. Bhaktivinoda Thakur had previously made a pilgrimage to the holy cities of Benares, Prayaga, Mathura, and Vrindavan in 1866. At the end of his stay in Narail, he wished to see again Vrindavan, the land of Krishna. He spent 3 months on it. There he met Srila Jagannatha Das Babaji, who was moving from Navadvipa in Bengal to Vrindavan every 6 months. Bhaktivinoda Thakur accepted Jagannatha Das Babaji as his eternally revered Siksa Guru, instructive spiritual master. Kedaranatha witnessed a series of attacks on pilgrims by a gang of bandits known as the Kanjars during his pilgrimage. This gang was known for their brutality and ruthlessness towards their victims, and they robbed and killed many pilgrims. When Kedaranatha learned of these attacks, he testified to the government about Kanjara's actions. After that, a commission was formed to eradicate this scourge, which included government officials and local leaders. Kedaranatha actively cooperated with this commission to help it find and capture the bandits. He gave valuable testimony and did everything in his power to help eradicate this problem. Ultimately, thanks to the efforts of a government commission, the Kanjars were caught and brought to justice for their crimes. From Vrindavan, he came to Kolkata and bought a house at 181 Maniktala Street, now called Ramesh Datta Street, near Beaton Park. He named the house Bhakti Bhavan, place of devotion, and began daily worship of Sri Giridhara. He was appointed head of the Barasat division. The famous Bengali writer Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay met Bhaktivinoda Thakur at Barasat in 1882. Bankim Chandra wrote a book about Krishna called Anandamatha, which presented worldly thoughts on Krishna, and he wanted to know Bhaktivinoda's opinion on his book. Bhaktivinoda Thakur expressed his disappointment with Bankim Chandra's book, and insisted that Bankim Chandra change his ideas to fit the teachings of Sri Chaitanya and Vaishnavism. Bankim Chandra accepted the challenge and began to study Vaishnavism with Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Bhaktivinoda Thakur spent 4 days preaching to Bankim Chandra, hardly eating and hardly sleeping. As a result, Bankim Chandra changed his ideas about Krishna and rewrote his book Anandamatha to bring it into line with the teachings of Sri Chaitanya. The book became one of the most famous works of Bankim Chandra and had a significant impact on Indian literature and the national movement for liberation from colonial oppression. Bhaktivinoda Thakur said that knowledge is power. In the last year of his stay in Barasat, 1886, Bhaktivinoda Thakur published an edition of the Bhagavad Gita with a Sanskrit commentary by Visvanatha Chakravarti Thakur, which he translated into Bengali, translation of Rasika Ranjana. He took on this task at the request of Babu Sarada Charana Mitra, a former judge of the Calcutta High Commission. Bankim Chandra wrote the foreword, acknowledging his debt to Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He remarked that all Bengali readers would be indebted to Bhaktivinoda for his holy work. From Barasat, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was transferred to Sriramapur. At nearby Saptagram, he visited the residence of the great Vaishnava saint Udarana Datta Thakura, a great associate of Lord Nityananda, who lived during the time of Sri Chaitanya in the 16th century AD. Bhaktivinoda Thakur continued his travels to various places in Bengal where the great Vaishnavas of that time lived. He visited Hanakula, where Abhirama Thakur lived, and Kulinagrama, where Vasu Ramananda lived. In Sriramapura, he produced his works such as Sri Chaitanya Shikshamrita, Vaishnava Siddhantamala, Prema Pradipa, and Mana Shiksha, and regularly published the Sajanatasani magazine. In Calcutta, he installed the Sri Chaitanya Yantra, a printing press at Bhakti Bhavan, where he printed several books including Maladhara's Sri Krishna Vijay, the Amnaya Sutra, and the Atharva Veda's Chaitanya-upanishad. However, finding Chaitanya-upanishad was a difficult task as she was little known. Bhaktivinoda Thakur visited many places to find it and finally got an old copy from a devotee, Vaishnava Pandit named Madhusudana Das. He wrote a Sanskrit commentary on the book and called it Sri Chaitanya Karanamrta. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was very active in spreading the teachings of Sri Chaitanya and creating organizations that promoted the preaching of pure bhakti. In Calcutta, he founded the Sri Vishva Vaishnava Sabha, which was dedicated to this purpose, and published the pamphlet Vishva Vaishnava Kalpavi to popularize its work. He also published his own version of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita with his commentary Amrita Prabhava Bhasya. Bhaktivinoda Thakur also introduced the Chaitanya calendar, which became known as the Chaitanya era, and helped spread the Chaitanya Panjika, a calendar that established the Gaura Purnima festival to mark the day of Chaitanya's appearance in the material world. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was also active in reading Vaishnava books and lecturing in various religious societies. He published a detailed account of the life of Sri Chaitanya in the English periodical Hindu Herald. In general, his work was aimed at spreading pure bhakti and the teachings of Sri Chaitanya. In 1887, Bhaktivinoda Thakur decided to leave the civil service and devote the rest of his life to the service of Krishna in Vrindavan, along with Bhakti Bringa Mahasaya. One night, while serving at Tarakashvara, he had a dream in which Sri Chaitanya appeared to him and said, "You will definitely go to Vrindavan, but first you have to do some service in Nabadwip. When will you do it?" When the Lord disappeared, Bhaktivinoda woke up. Thereafter, on the advice of Bhakti Bringa Mahasaya, he applied for a transfer to Krishna Nagara, where the government headquarters of the Nabadwip district is located. He turned down offers to take high positions in Assam and Tripura. At that time, he even tried to resign, but his application was not accepted. Finally, in December 1887, he managed to exchange positions with Babu Radha Madhava Vasu, the deputy magistrate of Krishna Nagara. During his stay in Krishna Nagara, Bhaktivinoda Thakur often went to Navadvipa and searched for the birthplace of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the exact location of which has been lost to time. One night, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was sitting on the roof of the Rani Dharmasala in Nabadwip, fingering a rosary, when he suddenly noticed a very tall tala tree in the distance. Next to the tree was a small building that emitted an amazing radiance. From that moment, he began to show great interest in this area. Shortly thereafter, he went to the Krishna Nagara collection, where he began to study some very old manuscripts such as Narahari Sarkar's Chaitanya Bhagavat and Navadvipa Dham Parikrama, as well as some old maps of the Navadvipa area. He went to the village of Balala Devi and talked to many elderly people there and revealed the facts about present-day Nabadwip. In 1887, he discovered that the place he had seen from the top of the Dharmasala was actually Mahaprabhu's birthplace. This was confirmed by Jagannatha Dasa Babaji, head of the Gaudiya Vaishnava community in Nabadwip. A big festival was held there. Bhaktivinoda published the Navadvipa Dhamma Mahatmya, which details the glories of Sri Chaitanya's birthplace. Also in 1887, Bhaktivinoda renovated the house of Jagannatha Das Babaji at Ravasgat. He took a leave of absence for 2 years and purchased a plot of land in Sri Godadrum Dvipa, or Svarupa Ganga. He built a nursing home there called Sarabi Kunj. In 1890, he founded Namahatu there. Sometimes Jagannatha Dasa Babaji used to come there and hold kirtan. Lord Nityananda installed his Namahata in the same place, and Bhaktivinoda considered himself the janitor of Namahata Nitai. When the birthplace was discovered, Bhaktivinoda and Jagannatha Das Babaji worshipped Lord Chaitanya there. One day, one of Bhaktivinoda's sons fell ill with a skin disease, and Jagannatha Das Babaji told the boy to lie down for the night at Lord Chaitanya's birthplace. He did so, and the next morning he was healed. In 1888, Bhaktivinoda took over the management of the village of Netrakona in the Miami Nasima district, as he could not maintain good health in Krishna Nagara, and asked to be transferred to a healthier region. From Netrakona, he came to Tangaila, and from there he was transferred to the Vardhamana region. There he held kirtan with devotees from a place called Amalajora, led by Kshetra Babu and Vipina Babu. In 1890, he was appointed head of the division in Kalara, and from there he often visited such holy places as Godadrum Dvipa, Navadvipa, Chapahati, Samudragana, Kupi, Kashtasali, Idrakapur, Baganapara, Pyaraganga, and the site of Vrindavan Dasa Thakur at Danura. Soon Bhaktivinoda Thakur was transferred for a few days to Ranigata, from where he again went to Dinajapura. Sailaja Prasad, his youngest son, was born there. In Dinajapur, Bhaktivinoda wrote his commentary on the Vidva Ranjana and a translation of the Bhagavad Gita. It was published in 1891 with Baladeva's commentary. In 1891, Bhaktivinoda Thakur retired from government service for 2 years. He wanted to preach the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. From his base at Svarupa Ganga, he visited places like Gatala and Ramajivana to lecture in clubs, societies, and organizations. He also often did this in Krishna Nagara. In March 1892, he traveled and preached with a group of Vaishnavas in the Basira Hut area. All this time he also wrote. He opened many Krishna worship centers, Namahata, in different parts of Bengal. Namahata became a self-sustaining success that continued to spread even after his return to public service. From Basir Hut, he went on his third journey to Vrindavan. He stopped at Amalajor to celebrate Ekadashi Day with Jagannatha Das Babaji. In Vrindavan, he visited all the forests. He continued to lecture and read on Harinama in various places in Bengal when he returned to Calcutta. In February 1891, he gave a lecture on his investigation into the exact location of Sri Chaitanya's birthplace. Among his listeners were highly educated people from all over Bengal, who received the news with great enthusiasm. From this assembly, the Sri Nabadwipa Dhamma Pracharini Sabha was formed to spread the glory of Yoga-Pita. That year, on Gora Purnima, a great festival was held in which the deities of Gora Vishnupriya were installed in the Yoga-Pita. All the learned Panditas, having discussed extensively the testimonies of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, agreed that Yoga-Pitha was the true birthplace of Mahaprabhu. In 1892, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur published the Vaishnava Siddhanta Mala from his headquarters in Bengal. He later printed individual chapters of the Vaishnava Siddhanta Mala as separate pamphlets for public distribution. In 1900, he published Harinama Chintamani in verse form in Bengali. In October 1894, at the age of 56, he resigned from his post as deputy magistrate, a move opposed by his family and government authorities. He stayed at Svarupa Ganga to worship, lecture, and revise his old writings. Sometimes he went to Calcutta. There he went from house to house begging for funds for the construction of the temple of Yogapita. In July 1896, Bhaktivinoda Thakur went to Tripura at the request of the king, who was a Vaishnava. He stayed in the capital for 4 days and preached the chanting of the holy name of Krishna. His lecture on the first day amazed all the local pundits. Over the next 2 days, the royal family and the general public were delighted with his talks about Mahaprabhu's pastimes. Returning to Svarupa Ganga, Bhaktivinoda Thakur printed a small pamphlet written in Sanskrit called Sri Gauranga Lila Smarana Mangala Stotram, with a commentary by Srila Siddhikanta Vakaspati of Nadia. The introduction in English was titled Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, His Life and Instructions. This book has found its way into the Royal Asiatic Society Library in London, the McGill University Library in Canada, and other respected institutions. It was reviewed in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society by Mr. F. W. Fraser, an erudite British scientist. In the rainy season of 1896, at the request of the Maharaja of Tripura, he went to Darjeeling and Karshiam. In 1897, he went to preach in many villages such as Medinipur and Sauri. Shishir Kumar Ghosh was the founder of the Amrita Bazar Patrika and author of the Sri Amiya Nimai Charita. He had great respect for Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He also began preaching the holy name throughout Calcutta and in many villages in Bengal. He published Sri Vishnu Priya on Ananda Bazar Patrika, edited by Bhaktivinoda. In one of his letters to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he wrote, I have not seen the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, but I consider you to be the 7th Goswamis. Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati, the son of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, lived in Puri as a strict hermit and worshipped at the Gandharvika Giridhari Math, one of the 7 matas next to the Samadhi grave of Haridasa Thakura. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, wanting to help his son, ordered the monastery to be cleaned and refurbished when he himself came to Puri in the early 20th century. After Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati left Puri for Srinabadwip Mayapur, Bhaktivinoda Thakur built his own bhajan spot on the beach, calling it Bhakti Kuti. Krishnadas Babaji, a devoted assistant and disciple of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, joined him there at this time. He was his constant companion until the end of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's life. At this time, he began a solitary worship, bhajan. In this place, he had many visitors. Some of them just wanted to harass him, while others were sincere and benefited immensely from his spiritual inspiration. In 1908, 3 months before Bhaktivinoda Thakur renounced the world, one of his sons, who was working in the government office of Calcutta, came home to inform his father that Sir William Duke, the chief secretary of the government, was in Calcutta. Bhaktivinoda Thakur served under him as a judge. Bhaktivinoda Thakur arranged to meet him the next day at the government building. Sir William Duke greeted Bhaktivinoda Thakur on the street in front of the building and personally escorted him to his office. Clasping his hands, he asked for forgiveness for having once planned to remove Bhaktivinoda Thakur from his position as district judge. It was because he thought that if such skilled Indians were to fill such important posts, the British would not last long in India. In the past, Sir William Duke often visited Bhaktivinoda's house and even took his meals there. Such familiarity between the British nobility and the indigenous population of India was unusual. Now that Sir William was old, he wanted to clear his conscience of guilt from the past and therefore confessed to Bhaktivinoda Thakur that he thought badly of him despite their close relationship. Bhaktivinoda Thakur replied, I have always considered you a good friend and well-wisher. Pleased with Sir William, he gave him his blessings. Bhaktivinoda Thakur later admitted that he was amazed that Duke wanted to harm him in some way. In 1908, Bhaktivinoda Thakur took the weight, robe of a Babaji or renunciation, at Satasana in Puri. Until 1910, he moved between Calcutta and Puri and continued to write, but after that he ceased all activities and remained in Puri, absorbed in the holy name of Krishna. He closed himself and entered Samadhi, claiming paralysis. On June 23, 1914, just before noon in Puri, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur left his body. This day was also the disappearance day of Sri Gadadhara Pandit. During Sankirtana, His remains were buried in Gadram after the next solstice. About Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur Sarada Charana Mitra, judge of the Calcutta Supreme Court, wrote, I knew Thakur Bhaktivinoda intimately as a friend and relative, and whenever I met him, our conversation after a few minutes turned to the subject of devotion, the philosophy of Dvaita-Dvaitavada, and the holy work that lay before him. No matter how honorable she was a hindrance to him. In his public service, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur wore court coats and trousers, double-sized tulsi neckbands, and tilaka. He was very firm in his decisions. He made decisions immediately. He did not allow any deceit in his court. No upstart could resist him. He shaved his head every month. He was always merciful to the Brahmins and equally supported the other castes. He never showed pride, and his friendly nature was a feature of his life. He never accepted gifts from anyone. He even refused all honors and titles offered to him by the government, on the grounds that they might interfere with his holy mission of life. He was very strict in moral principles and avoided a luxurious life. He never let me play the harmonium, and he never got into debt. He disliked theaters because they were frequented by public women. He spoke Bengali, Sanskrit, English, Latin, Urdu, Persian, and Aryan. He began writing books at the age of 12 and continued to publish a huge number of volumes until his passing from this world. His schedule: 4 o'clock, rise. 4:30, water procedures, japa. 7 o'clock, write letters. 7:30, reading. 8:30, welcome guests or continue reading. 9:30 to 9:45, rest. 9:45, morning bath, breakfast of half a liter of milk, a couple of chapatis, fruits. 9:55, ride to court in a carriage. 10 o'clock, the beginning of the court. 1 p.m., judgment is over. He came home, took a bath, and refreshed himself. 2 p.m., returned to the office. 5 p.m., translation of works from Sanskrit to Bengali. 7:30 to 8 p.m., rest. 10 p.m., wrote. 11 o'clock, hang up. Of the biggest achievements in his life, he opened many Vaishnava temples and places of pilgrimage in different parts of India, including Nabadwip and Vrindavan. Bhaktivinoda Thakur made a significant contribution to the development of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, including the creation of the first newspaper in Bengali dedicated to Vaishnavism. He wrote many books, including Harinama Chintamani and Sri Chaitanya Shikshamrita, which have become classic Vaishnavism texts. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was the first Vaishnava to actively use the technologies of his time, such as the printing press, to spread the teachings of Vaishnavism. He also played an important role in spreading the Krishna doctrine outside of India by sending his disciples to Europe and America. Here is a list of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's accomplishments in government service. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was appointed Justice of the Peace at Purnea, where he showed unwavering fairness and decisiveness in settling disputes. He was appointed Deputy Commissioner in Nadia and introduced a number of changes in the administrative system that significantly improved the situation in the area. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was the first Indian civil servant to be awarded the Medal of Nobility for his services in government service. He was appointed to the position of magistrate in Calcutta, where he made many changes in the process of legal proceedings and reduced the time of consideration of cases using intuition due to deep spiritual knowledge. Bhaktivinoda Thakur became the first Indian official to become a member of the Bengal Legislative Assembly. He did much to reform the administrative system in India, including fighting corruption and improving the quality of education. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was recognized as one of the most successful officials in British India due to his ability to resolve conflicts between the population and the government. He was appointed Justice of the Peace in Berhampur, where he was known for his vigilance and relentless pursuit of justice. Bhaktivinoda Thakur did a lot of work to improve healthcare in India, especially in rural areas. He was awarded the Educational Merit Medal for his contribution to the development of education in India, including the establishment of schools and colleges. Bhaktivinoda Thakur led a number of activities to combat drugs and alcoholism in India. Bhaktivinoda Thakur created the first newspaper in Bengali, Samwad Kaumudi, which was devoted to social and religious issues. He was the author of many books, including Sat Sandarbha, where he systematized the teachings of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was the first Indian official to use his authority to promote the religious and cultural values of his country. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was one of the first Indian officials who called for the liberation of India from colonial rule and the establishment of an independent state. He was a supporter of the establishment of national institutes and research centers in India. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was active in collecting and preserving the national and cultural sites of India. He has done a lot of work to improve working conditions and protect the rights of workers in India. Bhaktivinoda Thakur advocated the establishment of peace and harmony between different peoples and cultures in India. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was the first Indian official to recognize the need for religious reform in India and advocate a modern interpretation of religious traditions. He has been active in the conservation and protection of nature in India, including the creation of parks and reserves. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was a supporter of tolerance and respect for different religions and cultures in India and in the world. He advocated for creating new jobs in India and attracting investment to the country. Bhaktivinoda Thakur did a lot of work to preserve and promote Indian folk music and dance. He became the first Indian official to recognize the need to protect animal rights and work to create laws in this area. Bhaktivinoda Thakur advocated respect for the environment and principles of sustainable development in India. He carried out work to spread knowledge about traditional medicine in India and protect the rights of patients. Bhaktivinoda Thakur advocated improving the living conditions of Indian peasants and worked to reduce poverty in rural areas. Bhaktivinoda Thakur worked to strengthen the Indian economy and attract investment to the country. He was a supporter of the creation of new industrial zones and the development of agriculture in India. Bhaktivinoda Thakur worked to improve medical care in India and protect the rights of patients. He was a proponent of creating new education and development programs in India. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is a living personality who has inspired many. All our acharyas who have lived deep and rich lives, it is their contribution and example that they wanted to show us the different ways of how we act and live life, so that eventually come to perfection. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, by his example, shows not only a humble Vaishnava in such a classical sense, but also a responsible, temperamental, resolute personality, able to make decisions with lightning speed and act in conditions in which the vast majority would simply be confused and would not be authorized to act and make such decisions like this. Bhaktivinoda means one who continually takes pleasure in bhakti. Bhakti is pure devotional service and Vinod is pleasure, that is pleasure in bhakti.